Thank you. Thank you for the introduction. Okay, what cognitive metaphors is materialism based on? Materialism deeply pervades popular and scientific thinking about the world and ourselves. However, what does it mean precisely to think in a materialistic way? It's not very clear. In current philosophy, it's more common to talk about physicalism or naturalism instead of materialism, mainly because classical mechanical materialism from the 17th century is outdated. Naturalism, on the other hand, is considered more flexible and comprehensive. In the literature, we can also find the labels materialism, physicalism, and naturalism used interchangeably. And honestly, there is the same problem with these positions or labels, as I will show in a moment. I will mainly refer to the label naturalism to align with the philosophical literature. So, naturalism is said to be the orthodoxy among contemporary analytic philosophers. However, right next to this statement, we can read that, unfortunately, naturalism is not a clearly defined philosophical position. Of course, we can formulate the definition of naturalism that nearly all would accept, namely, according to naturalism, everything that truly exists is natural. We can do the same for materialism and physicalism, exchanging natural with material and physical respectively. Nevertheless, it does not help because, as David Hume noticed, there is no more ambiguous and equivocal word than nature. It is not much better with the words material and physical. There are some attempts to make naturalism less ambiguous. I want to mention two of them, the most common, I think. First, space-time. D.M. Armstrong formulated a well-known definition of naturalism: the doctrine that reality consists of nothing but a single, all-embracing spatio-temporal system. Second, science. This utterance by Wilfrid Sellars is often invoked in the context of naturalism clarification. Naturalism is the claim that, in the dimension of describing and explaining the world, science is the measure of all things, of what is that it is, and of what is not that it is not. So, what is the problem with equating naturalistic nature with space-time? Well, it turns out that, as Sam Baron puts it, recent work in fundamental physics suggests that space-time does not exist. The loss of space-time arises with respect to theories of quantum gravity. He cites, among others, the works of Edward Anderson, Jonathan Bain, Julian Barbour, Daniel Oriti, and Carlo Rovelli. Of course, they may be wrong. It may turn out that space-time is real and fundamental as many naturalists thought it was. However, the very consideration or speculation, if you will, about the possibility that space-time is not fundamental, where eminent physicists conduct some of them, plus the absence of any outrage reactions against these speculations, accusing them of being incompatible with naturalism, as in the case of creationism, for example, shows us that it is inadequate to understand naturalism as the doctrine that reality consists of nothing but a single, all-embracing spatio-temporal system. When defining naturalism using the notion of science, the issue is much more complicated, primarily because the very concept of science is very complicated, so I have to simplify it a bit. I will allude to the seminal article by Tim Crane and Hugh Mellor, "There is no question of physicalism," from 1990, slightly altering and expanding the key passage. When some naturalists say that there is nothing except what science identifies and explains, we have to ask what science this statement invokes: present science or some hypothetical future science? This question poses a dilemma, so-called Hempel's dilemma. Understanding the word science as present science entails that any future extension of it would invalidate naturalism so construed. It entails that science is already complete, but no one believes this. And suppose we want to understand science as an otherwise unspecified future science. In that case, we shall not be able to say anything about our ontology, about what exists and what does not exist, which is just what naturalism was supposed to be about. Of course, we can respond, as many naturalists do, that we can formulate some constraints future science will abide by. Nevertheless, it's not an easy task. It concerns the well-known demarcation problem, Problem distinguishing between science and non-science. Yes, one of the biggest problems considered by the 20th century philosophers of science. And the most general lesson that we can take from these considerations is the probable futility of seeking an epistemic version of a demarcation criterion, as Larry Laudan put in the article with the suggestive title, The Demise of the Demarcation Problem. So unfortunately, the concept of science does not help us to disambiguate naturalism. There are many more attempts to clarify naturalism in the literature with corresponding merits and demerits. I do not have enough time to run through all of them. However, what is more important, in the literature, we can also observe what kind of propositions are approved by most naturalists as unproblematic and which are unacceptable for them. Based on that observation, it is possible, I hope, to formulate a clarification of naturalism that is more accurate than those presented so far. And that was my approach during the research. However, some preliminaries are necessary before I can present and explain the results. First, the concept of cognitive metaphor and its significance. It's pointed out that metaphors and analogies not only help us understand, communicate, and argue for new ideas in science and philosophy. Some claim that they are crucial for theory formulation and its development. As Murray has framed it, theoretical explanation can be understood as a metaphoric redescription of the domain of explanandum, that is, the description of what is to be explained. An example will be helpful to make it clearer. By doing some experiments with light, we come across an interference pattern. The same pattern shows up in the case of water ripples. So, explaining the behavior of light, we can assume that light is like a wave on the water, and by analogy transfer many familiar and observable features of waves to light. Cognitive metaphors are also easy to spot in cases like treating the brain as a computer and the mind as software. Second, the opposition between intersubjectivity and intrasubjectivity. The concept of intersubjectivity is rather known. Everything that many subjects can perceive as identical, like a chair, a billiard ball, or a wave, is intersubjective. What is not intersubjective but still possible to be experienced is intrasubjective. Our thoughts, beliefs, values, and pains are intrasubjective. The whole mind and consciousness, together with our agency, can be considered as a prototype of intrasubjectivity. Having the concept of cognitive metaphor and the opposition between intersubjectivity and intrasubjectivity, I can present my clarification of naturalism derived from the literature. Naturalism is about the rejection of intrasubjective cognitive metaphors when talking about what is fundamental or what is irreducible. We can infer from this that naturalists try to reduce everything to beings that are intersubjective or analogical to what is intersubjective. Of course, our daily intersubjective experience is submerged in space-time, so we can say that it comes down to reducing everything to spatio-temporal beings. However, my definition is broader. As in the case of light, starting from some metaphor, a wave of water, we can stretch and twist its content, so we remain with something impossible to experience intersubjectively, a wave without any medium. Nevertheless, a wave without a medium does not recognize anything intrasubjective either. We can see the same in the history of philosophy. Atoms, as Democritus considered them, cannot be experienced intersubjectively. Democritus himself told us that our senses mislead us. However, we understand atoms through the metaphor of tiny corpses, grains of sand, that are intersubjectively experienced. On the other hand, Anaxagoras' nous, the cosmic mind that has control over all things, or Plato's form of the good, these concepts are based on intrasubjective cognitive metaphors. I do not have to add that most of the controversy surrounding naturalism or materialism concerns the mind, reason, free will, values, etc., all available to inner experience and not intersubjective experience, and that God and other spiritual beings are imagined primarily by intrasubjective cognitive metaphors. Many fascinating examples from the literature align with the proposed understanding of naturalism. Not having enough time to show several of them, I will only present one of the most flagrant cases. One of the most popular arguments against materialism about Mary the Neuroscientist by Frank Jackson comes from the observation that it is impossible to deduce what it is like to see red or feel pain, given all the knowledge of the brain accessible intersubjectively. What is intriguing, some hardcore materialists concede that the intrasubjective feeling of pain is not reducible to the publicly observable brain processes. Hence, they conclude that there is nothing like feeling pain or seeing red or any phenomenal feeling. One of the leading contemporary materialists, François Kammerer, in the article Ethics Without Sentience, Facing Up to the Probable Insignificance of Phenomenal Consciousness, puts it directly, quote, "Materialism about the mind forces us to abandon the view that sensory qualities like pain and pleasure really exist in the phenomenal realm as they appear to be." That kind of statement isn't something new. Daniel Dennett, one of the most famous philosophers, claimed something like that in 1969 in Continent Consciousness and in 1978 in Why You Can't Make a Computer That Feels Pain. He no longer expresses them straightforwardly, though, especially in his popular books, because he would simply have provoked a chorus of ill-considered outrage that would have postponed indefinitely any remotely even-handed exploration of the position he wanted to defend, as he confessed in Caveat Emptor in 1993, which he wrote in relation to his famous book Consciousness Explained. I want to conclude with some more or less robust counterbalance to naturalism that can be found in contemporary philosophy. It also points to my primary inspirations. First, Husserl's phenomenology, in particular books presented on the slide. Second, more recent and from an American analytic tradition, Thomas Nagel, and his classical The View from Nowhere from 1989, where you can find more interesting analysis about the opposition between intersubjectivity and intrasubjectivity, and his Mind and Cosmos, a newer book, Why Materialist Neo-Darwinian Conception of Nature is Almost Certainly False. And third, perhaps religion as an attitude of being attentive to what is not analogous to intersubjectivity, but what seems very important. The personal, the other, and his hair, or his hair with a capital H, the inner intrinsic world. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you for a very crisp overview. We have time for one question, certainly, if there is one, please. Lunch seems to have worked its fatal influence. You touch on so many different areas. Which
yes,
is good.
It's very, very layered issue. Yeah. So to only present my result, I have to. Yes.
Yes. No. This is not a criticism. We do have a question now. Yes. Yeah. Could you come up, please? Yeah. Thank you.
So at one point, you said that some recent ideas in physics have led some people to say space and time don't exist.
Or it's not fundamental.
That's what I was going to say. Wouldn't it be more accurate to say that they're not fundamental in the sense that there is some reality that from which they emerge, but space and time are real. But there's something more fundamental that underlies them. That's all I wanted to say. Would you agree with
I think, but there are disputes about that. So there are some physicists and philosophers who say that it's more appropriate to say that space-time does not exist, but only some kind of functional properties that we take as spatio-temporal. The article I cited was Sam Baron's article, and he defended that position in this article. I don't want to take a position on that. I only want to show that if you want to define naturalism by space-time, claiming that according to naturalism, space-time is fundamental, there are several problems with contemporary physics. Thank you.